The Baths and Washhouses Act of 1846 placed the earnest on local authorities to construct public bath and washhouses for their residents. This act led to the creation of many of Newcastle's first baths. One of the oldest still remaining buildings was constructed on New Bridge Street to the east of the city centre. The Gibson Street baths were built in 1907 and form one of the most impressive public bath buildings still in the city to this day. The construction of many of the historic pools in the city dates back to 1929, when Newcastle City Council were looking at schemes to create employment. The City Baths Committee recommended the construction of a number of pools in Scotswood, Jesmond, Fenham and Byker, and then in 1938 both Jesmond and Fenham pools were opened, almost 10 years since they were first announced. There are a number of other local pools which were constructed in a similar architectural style. Heaton Pool was located on Biddlestone Road and was originally opened in 1925. It was a small building with a pool in the centre and changing cubicles around the pool's edge. Fenham Pool opened in 1938, designed by Hetherington and Wilson. This was a single-storey building constructed from brick and stone, with a pool shed behind. Whilst it's not an identical design to Jesmond or Heaton, all three share similar design flourishes. Byker Pool was originally constructed in 1907. This building follows a different form to the Fenham and Heaton pools. This is a brick building featuring a gable roof and is of a greater scale than the other neighbourhood pool halls. During the 1970s and the construction of the Byker wall, the pool building was retained and included within the outer perimeter of the wall. However, it was no longer used as a pool. Instead, this was converted into a boiler room and plant for the new Byker Wall estate. The boiler room would eventually move from the space, and Byker Pool has since been converted into an indoor climbing centre, which is still in use to this day. A bathhouse has been located within Newcastle city centre, adjacent to College Street since 1859. However, the current structure dates back to the 1920s. This is different to those other pools previously mentioned, as this also included a Turkish bath. Newcastle City Baths is an interesting structure architecturally, as this is part pool with Turkish baths and part music venue, all constructed within the same building. The eastern wing holds the music venue, which currently operates as the O2 City Hall, and the western wing hosts the pool and the Turkish baths. This structure was designed by Nicholas and Dixon, Spain, in 1927.
Ship-sized pool will one day be part of an extensive sports centre which the Urban District Council is planning to develop. Already there is a large sports arena nearby with an all-weather practice area.
The William Thompson Recreation Centre in Burnley has given way to another, our new centre.
Yeah, so the 1960s Wolfenden report was where we've got this line in there which sets the strategic direction for pools, which is that moving forward, pools should be built indoors. And Wolfenden's report at that point in time, which was post World War II, as governments were looking at this, the health of society, in a way started this catalyst of sport building its way into government policy. So we had a sports minister shortly follow in 1963. We saw the first emergence of this term "sport for all" come into government policy that was within those documents, and start to see sport being considered and formally planned within council's remits and in a way architected from the top by governments, which, those two reports in the 60s started to see the explosion of the leisure centre, which had been created in a way as pilots and innovations within the 60s, but the 70s saw those be built at a much greater pace. And we see those in this area where where Killingworth was built. Lightfoot was built, and Ponteland had leisure centres that were built in the 1970s, and those started to then roll out as models for council and in a way government provided sports centres that promoted this healthy, active lifestyle that governments want. Reports ultimately track their way into policy, and the 1984 facilities planning model that was created by Sport England didn't have a Lido as providing water provision for communities. And so when councils were looking at how they planned out their leisure estate to adhere to this, and again to apply for funding centrally to build these, then if they had a Lido, that could represent a water deficiency, even though it was still a valid site to be looked at and to be used by the public. And so we saw a decline of Lido stock from around the 1960s to probably 1990, of them go down from around 300-ish down to probably 130 were left at the end in the 2000s, purely through that decision. So once that policy was put in place, then funding wouldn't have been available to restore Lidos, and so any Lidos that remain, and there are a great number that are there. The ones that are there were saved by either community groups, saved by local communities, or by councils who realise, well, actually, this site works. We know how it works. We know why we like it. It's iconic for where we are, and so we'll invest that money and find a way to maintain it. So Tyneside in Plymouth is probably a classic example that's not a dissimilar sized space to this, and that's an iconic destination for people, and it's retained by their local council.
In 1974, after local government reorganisation, the Tyne and Wear County Council was formed. This created a two-tier system of government, with the county councils sitting above the district councils, such as Newcastle and North Tyneside. One of their first acts was the creation of a Tyne and Wear leisure plan, which showed the influences of the Wolfenden Report, as it called for the creation of multi-purpose sports centres. Specifically, there should be 6 of these in Newcastle, one for every 50,000 residents. Newcastle City Council were not on board with this leisure plan, as it had been prepared without the district council's knowledge. They wanted to be part of these discussions on leisure, but had been dictated to by the county council. The rise of leisure centres throughout the 1970s would see many of these built in the city. Their purposes ranged from indoor sports halls to larger complexes, including swimming pools. In 1988, local governments were faced with budget cuts, which forced them to cut a number of services. This was due to Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government introducing the poll tax. Newcastle City Council was under pressure to cut its budget under threats of poll tax capping. Newcastle's pools had always been subsidised throughout their lifespan and were never considered to be profit earning. Leisure services were chosen as a method of cost saving. The focus of these cuts were not on the 20 to 30-year-old leisure centres, which had been constructed in the decades prior, but instead these cuts focused on the smaller neighbourhood pools such as Fenham, Byker and Heaton. The idea at the time was that the neighbourhood pools could be closed and people could travel further to the purpose-built leisure centres. Local press at the time covered these closures, and much public debate was held on which pools should close. The newspapers fed this by publishing subsidy amounts and visitor numbers for each of these local pools. In the end, Fenham, Jesmond, Heaton and Byker pools would all be closed. To make up for the loss of the East End's pool, a new leisure centre was proposed on Shields Road. The new East End pool was located 1.4 kilometres away from the Heaton Pool and 200 metres away from the former Byker Pool. The site of the Heaton Pool has since been replaced by a doctor's surgery. The local neighbourhood pools would not close without a fight. These pools had stood as part of communities for decades, and now the communities would have to take care of them. Fenham Pool originally closed in 2003. A local community group known as the Fenham Swimming Project stepped in to save the pool and allowed this to reopen in 2005. The pool achieved its 100,000th user since its reopening in June 2007. This community group were able to run the pool for 14 successful years. However, dwindling numbers and structural issues found within the pool were to put a stop to this. The cost of repairs to the pool were not able to be covered by the community group's funds. With no other option, the community group handed the pool back to Newcastle City Council. This has now sat empty since.
Well, Jesmond Pool closed as a result of a round of council budget cuts, and it's absolutely shocking to think that it's been more than 30 years while they've been rounds of budget cuts at local authorities. So I think it was 1991 when there was a budget proposal to close Jesmond Pool, and there was a huge row, but nonetheless the council went ahead with the closure. I don't think that multi-leisure centres had a bad effect on Jesmond. In some ways they showed the way forward, because it's the addition of extra facilities like the gym, the activities, the classes, which have helped make Jesmond Pool a financial success. I think there are different reasons why some projects succeed and others fail. Some projects, basically the building or the facility is not sustainable, either because it's got major structural problems or for some reason or other it's never going to be a success. And another thing which is key is the real genuine support of local communities, because without the support of local communities to use the facility, again, it's not going to be a success. So I think in Jesmond we were very lucky because we had an active, supportive local community, and the building was capable of changing to accommodate modern needs. I think the history of Jesmond Pool shows how a large number of people can actually change things, because in some communities, if the council announces a closure or whatever, everybody just assumes it's a fait accompli and nothing can be done. But if there's one good thing about Jesmond, there's a lot of people, and it isn't just one or two, it's quite a lot of people who are very happy to take affairs into their own hands, do something and address a problem and solve it. So I think we're lucky to have such a resilient community in Jesmond.
Jesmond Pool received lottery funding in 2001 after 4 years of progressing a bid. This would cause the pool to close in June 2002 and then would reopen in February 2003. This would include a new foyer, steam room, sauna, changing rooms, fitness suite in the basement and an activity room at the first floor. Gibson Street baths closed in 1965, making this one of the first in the city to close. The pool was covered over and turned into badminton courts, which eventually came to close too. This building was left vacant until 2016, when the baths went up for sale. Newcastle Chronicle announced in 2016 that the Gibson Street baths would go up for auction. The auction was then delayed due to community interest group Save Gibson Street Baths for People Not Developers. These listed the building as an asset of community value. A building or other land is an asset of community value if its main use has recently been or is presently used to further the social well-being or social interests of the local community. The purpose of this is that it allows for communities to have the right to bid for an asset if this is sold, allowing communities, if they secure the funds to bid and secure the asset. The community group's plan, if they won the bid, was to turn the pool into a social enterprise hotel, cafe, bar and community space. However, after 3 auctions, the property was still in the hands of Newcastle City Council. The Save Gibson Street Baths for People Not Developers did not purchase the site. Now, almost 8 years after these initial auctions, the site is still deteriorating. This building needs saving, but currently there is not a route forward for it.
So in 2012, when austerity measures were being put in place by Newcastle City Council, a lot of services were under threat. Grants to the arts, libraries, leisure centres, and Newcastle City Pool, as it was called then, was one of the victims of the cuts. There were lots of campaigns across Newcastle to save these vital services, and obviously a lot of people wanted the pool to remain open, but within a few months of the announcement, the council took the decision that the pool would close. The building was already grade 2 listed, so we knew it couldn't be demolished, but we were worried about it being sold on for another use. So getting it listed as an asset of community value gave us a kind of voice with the council, and we would have had to be we were notified when it was put on the market. One of the considerations that we did have was to try and bid for the Turkish baths on their own. What we didn't know was who else would bid for the building. The council had suggested to us that it was very unlikely it would be a pool operator, it might be a hotel, it might be somebody else. So we said, please, anybody who's interested, just give them our number. We're really happy to talk to anybody and see how we can fit in with the plans of whatever else might be happening on the building. The only organisation that got in touch with us were Fusion, who were a pool operator and were interested in the whole building. So we spoke to them in depth and realised that their aims aligned to ours. It's a city centre pool. It's very different to a lot of community pools in as much as your audience is generally people who work or study in the city centre. There are a few people who live in the city centre, but it's very different to kind of Jesmond or Elswick, where you've got a community around it. So post-COVID, you have less people coming into work in the city centre, so your audience is less. People might be coming in 2 or 3 days a week or not coming in at all. So that's a big challenge for leisure operators, globally. I linked in with a national network called the Historic Pools of Britain, and they meet and they share information between different pool campaigns, and it was really, really beneficial. I had almost given up on this pool being saved when I went to one of their meetings, and all across the country people were being told by their councils their pool wasn't viable, nobody wanted to swim in historic pools, but they were turning them around. So there's a really successful one in Bramley Baths in Leeds, others in different stages all around the country. So that's a really helpful network. Then on a more local level, we reached out to Jesmond Pool to get some help writing a business plan. And I was a little bit cautious in case they saw the city pool as competition. But no, they said to us, they were a social enterprise. Their aim was to get more people into swimming. So actually working with another pool just helped further their aim. And we since have been in touch with Elswick. I think Elswick have been in touch with Jesmond. So there is a network of pools, and especially community pools, helping each other because they want to get people into swimming. That's their aim. So what we have in the city bath is a Victorian Turkish bath, and it was an idea taken in Victorian times from hammams, which are traditional baths in Turkey. The Victorians adapted them, and they're more hot temperatures, so there's 4 chambers getting increasingly hot with dry heat. So that's what differs from a steam room, for example, which is more wet heat. And they were introduced in Victorian times, and they were seen to have health benefits. And they also sort of tied in with the rise of I think it was the Bathhouse Act, which meant that councils had to ensure that the public had access to washing facilities both for themselves and to their clothes. So there was a huge network of pools, bathhouses which had lots of individual kind of slipper baths, pools and Turkish baths across all cities. So in Newcastle, I think there were kind of 5 or 8 kind of Turkish baths and bathhouses in the city. So what a Victorian Turkish bath is a series of chambers that you go in and get hotter and hotter and hotter. National lottery funding, through the community side of it, through the heritage side of it, is really important. It's great money for community groups to tap into. We as a Friends group had support from the National Lotteries Community Fund. I think we did look into heritage funding for this building, but it didn't work for us or for Fusion in terms of timescale, but it can be make or break for certain heritage projects, so it is invaluable.
During its heyday, there were 300 lidos in the country. The coastal village of Tynemouth would construct its own outdoor pool in the 1920s. Tynemouth Pool would be a popular attraction to the 1970s when this was led to decline. The final nail in the coffin was the decision to turn the pool into a rock pool, costing £200,000 at the time. The pool was filled with large boulders. The concrete shell of the pool has continued to deteriorate. However, now there is an increasing interest in the revival of this pool. A local group have been leading the revival of this, with a planning application submitted to North Tyneside Council.
Yeah, so my name is Michael Wood. I currently work at Northumbria University, working in sport research and in sport management. And I got involved in this project to restore the pool and to research lidos around a decade ago. I used to come here as a child with my gran and with my parents, and my gran used to love it here. She works here in the 30s and in the 40s as a leisure assistant who would be dishing out the towels and taking people's money. And she used to tell a fantastic story, which was where they would sit in the clubhouse and they'd be working in that area, and they would watch the tide gradually coming up, and they would be able to spot the big waves coming, and they would have a right good laugh when the biggest wave would come and it would wash people into the pool who were laying there sunbathing. So it was just somewhere that we really enjoyed coming, and when it closed in 1995 it was really disappointing. And as I moved back into the region and sort of, I guess, looked at things to keep us busy and things to do that could make a difference, this is something that I stepped forward to get involved with. I think it came to close in 1995, probably just due to a number of different factors, but largely down to its managed decline. So Tynemouth Indoor Pool opened in 1971, and that was part of a change and a shift in leisure pools and leisure centres and public places of leisure. And there was never really any plan at a national level to maintain lidos within the leisure estate. And so the council would have been probably seeing this steadily declining, which in turn would be meaning that people wouldn't come and visit it. and would prefer to do other things. And so you get those two factors send it almost into a vicious circle where not many people are coming. Does that then necessitate investment? And if they're seeing other pools around the country starting to close as well, and there's not really any funding available for outdoor pools, then it comes a point where they have to cut their losses. And they closed it in '95, tried at that point in time to find a new owner for it. So they offered it to the Grand Hotel, potentially offered it to other people. But in the end, they closed it, demolished the buildings that were in there, and then spent money to turn it into a rock pool, and effectively to put it into, to mothball it really, is to figure out then what to do with it. A decade has meant we've spent a lot of time doing the due diligence, so scraping back the layers and understanding the complexity of the site, but also the opportunity of the site. And the planning application that we submitted last year was given a minded to approval decision, which was exactly what we expected. We had an outstanding bird survey in there, which had lapsed. As a whole, the scheme of work is in a place where we now know the sustainability of the operation, so how a site will generate revenue to sustain it. So next steps are going to be the planning decision. Then we'll bring on. We'll be in discussions with the council about ownership and risk and liability. We'd bring on a leisure operator at that point in time who would then look at the plans and look at the detailed sort of floor space and align that to a business plan. And then once you've got that agreement in place, you're then able to go out and get funding. As we look at trends in leisure and developments in leisure, it's something that we've seen happen probably over the last decade as leisure was moved from being a non-core service delivered by councils, and so we saw this new model exist. At the same time, we've seen, as you would expect in any industry, the evolution of private sector providers who've taken on different aspects of leisure and made them into profitable businesses. So the challenge with leisure as an industry is that it delivers a vast amount of socio-economic benefits, especially from a health point of view and in the general public, which for example, in a site like this one, we would be delivering 50,000 swims a year on forecasts that we've got, which we know from work that's been done by Swim England that has a significant societal benefit in what they're doing. So there's always going to be an argument for funding leisure because it promotes public health and ensures that we're not, in a way, it's that proactive investment in public health rather than assuming that the health service is going to pick up everything at a later date. Leisure, I guess there's always an evolution in consumer behaviour and in what people are looking for, and so these small pools on their own would have been expensive to maintain, and again you've got to operate to get the right number of people through them. If you've got a leisure centre which has got a number of different destinations in there, like be sports hall, swimming pool, gym areas and potentially tennis courts, then you're going to get a much greater footfall through there. You've got the economies of scale of staff who sit and administer that, and so they just became the model that moved forward. So Future Lidos Group, when it was set up in 2020 and then started to form and build momentum through 2021 and 2022, submitted an application to Heritage Lottery to do some work to consolidate the evidence for the sector and build a toolkit. That was accepted in January 2023, and so we worked throughout that year to build this online resource that drew together all this evidence from the sector. Again, it was built from the fact that there was probably 40 to 50 projects at that point in time who, driven by communities and also by councils who were exploring this, who were looking at either recreating and restoring a Lido like this or about creating a new one. And that funding was vital to be able to do that work. Toolkit's launched. It's had great response in the press. The Future Lidos group continues to grow and connect with other Lidos that are in there. We're looking to extend that funding so that we can work in helping to gain more funding for more pools, to engage with the existing pool infrastructure that's out there to help them to consolidate their business models and to grow and to invest in certain areas. And so Heritage Lottery and National Lottery funding and the support of DCMS is really vital to help us to really understand this sector so that we can make the right strategic decisions to be able to invest. I think we always have to check our bias on this. You know, we're passionate advocates of trying to restore this pool and bring it back to be, you know, a regional asset for the community and bring it back as a tourist destination and just to make this site stunning again. But we also must make sure that, one, it's a sustainable business model and it's what people want to do. And we only have to look at how many people are in the sea today that people are venturing back outdoors, and it's a trend that's probably been rolling on for about a decade or more now, where people are engaging in triathlons and open water swimming and lake swimming and sea swimming, and so Lidos and a diverse range of leisure facilities creates, in a way, an old innovation that people are really drawn to and are wanting to engage with and visit.
The project even received the support from the Mayor of Sydney's Waverley Council.
Hello to the Mayor, Council and residents of Tynemouth from the Antipodes here in Sydney, Australia. I'm Paula Marcellus, the Mayor of Waverley in Sydney, home to the world famous Bondi Beach, Bondi Icebergs Pub and Pool. But like your Tynemouth outdoor pool, Icebergs has had its share of ups and downs over the past century, but it is now one of the most recognisable tourist destinations in Australia. So I urge all stakeholders and decision makers to carefully consider the potential of having such a pool and how it can benefit your community and visitors, and to showcase the spectacular Tynemouth coastline and the northeast.
In 2016, a further round of council budget cuts meant that the 6 remaining leisure centres were handing over to the GLL group. This deal would apparently save Newcastle City Council $14.2 million over the 20-year deal. This deal would lead to the closure of Elsick Pool, with it stated that no operator was wanting to take this on. This pool at the time was losing £260,000 a year. Elsick Pool would thankfully reopen 4 years later, run by a community group, and is still in operation to this day. The latest pool under construction in the city is the new leisure centre at West Denton, funded by the Levelling Up Fund. This replaced the former West Denton Leisure Centre and Pool, which had reached the end of its service life. The future of places such as Fenham Pool and the Gibson Street Baths hangs in the balance. Every effort should be taken to avoid the demolition of these former community buildings.
Even if it's not under threat, use it, support it. If it is under threat and that is the case across the country. Kind of speak up. There will be other people who use it who are also keen to save it, and I think that's happening in Gateshead. There's different communities that use the pools and the leisure centres for different reasons, and those groups can come together, and you do have a really strong voice. If you can't stop it from being closed, then you can set up a community organisation to help run it. It is possible that there is a network of kind of community-run ventures out there that are willing to support you, and there's a lot of support out there.
Well, the first thing people can do to save their local sports facilities of all sorts is use them, because unless people use them, they will not succeed. The next thing, I suppose, is to see if there are opportunities to volunteer, to provide support, just to talk to neighbours about the benefits of using a local facility. But I suppose the main thing is just use it and support it.
Yeah, I think that to help us, just keep telling us what you think. If you think it's a great idea, tell us that. If you've got reservations about it, we need that data. It has to be if we're going to, we've put a lot of effort into getting this far. If we're going to deliver it and build it, then we need that open and honest and transparent feedback that helps us make good decisions and make sure that what is constructed here is right for this site and it's right for this local community, and it then promotes its sustainability. I'd encourage everybody to go and swim in Lidos wherever you are. Whatever you're doing in your holidays in the UK or in other parts of the world. Go and swim in them, see what works, see what doesn't work. Again, give us some of that information, and tell us why certain Lidos work. I was lucky enough to be in Gurrock 2 weeks ago, and I went for a night swim, which was from 10 o'clock till 12 o'clock at night, the most glorious sunset. And it was like nothing I'd ever really experienced before. The community was fantastic. And I just loved it, and straight away I'm thinking, how do we do that here when we get it open? So we're always learning about that. At different points in time, we're going to try and sell things, or we're going to try and raise different pots of money to allow us to do surveys and small bits of work. So please be as generous as you can be. If you've got a burning desire to raise money for this project, then we'd love to hear from you. And just stay in the conversation about this pool, and hopefully we will go through those various milestones, and when we come to ask funders for pots of money, we'll get over the line. If we don't, we might be crowdfunding and coming out to people to try and top that up.